during the Second World War, those were the days when at least air travel was becoming possible. If we go back just a few decades earlier, then naturally you would only have some of these world-famous pilots that would go on these what were considered very dangerous and adventurous trips, having pit stops on Iceland, for example, while traveling over the Atlantic. But if we go back to the time of the First World War, for example, well, then for the Versailles Conference, you would have to gather everybody on a boat, whether going from or well, if it was in Europe, then maybe there was at least some chance for rail travel. But considering also that the continent had suffered so much damage in the previous years, there was still a lot of traveling by boat. And for the Americans going across the Atlantic, that is not something you will do under a week. So these Europe trips, so to say, for those presidents, they would often, and in Versailles, you couldn't just go for one day or two. You had to stay there and negotiate. So you would be gone from the country for weeks and weeks, if not months and months. And naturally, considering that there were many important things in your own country, you had to certainly you weren't able to give as much time as you would like to be away on foreign trips. Then later, during the post-war era, we have a couple of these visits by American presidents to Europe. Usually there is some phrase in the speech that sticks with people. Probably the first one was John F. Kennedy's famous speech in West Berlin in 1963, which was just after the Warsaw Pact countries, and in reality the Soviet Union had launched the construction of the Berlin Wall and started dividing West Berlin from the rest. Naturally, there had been, of course, the Berlin blockade in 1948 without a wall, but and this is actually a situation that could be considered quite similar to what we're facing right now in Ukraine. We have a piece of territory which, in the minds of Ukrainians, in the minds of all the Western allies, and in the minds of, according to the international legal order, is part of Ukraine. And then another power comes in and decides that by force they want to change the facts on the ground. And the same situation was with Berlin, which, according to the Potsdam Agreement and the after-war conferences, the Western powers, whether divided into one single Western sector or three sectors, the French, the British, the American, there was supposed to be uninterrupted access to this area. So once the wall started coming up, it created a new crisis in relations. And the Soviets were hoping, just as with the Berlin blockade in 1948, that the Western allies would simply realize that this is getting hard, so let's maybe give up that piece of territory and not have this problem on our mind. Naturally, Vladimir Putin was hoping for exactly the same reaction when he invaded Ukraine now nearly exactly a year ago. So the situation is similar, and as John F. Kennedy showed up in West Berlin then and stated that today, as it was an honor to be a Roman citizen 2,000 years ago, today, being in Berlin is the important place to be in, and the famous words of "Ich bin ein Berliner," which later created some urban tales. There was never any doubt that he wasn't this jelly-filled donut, which in Germany are called Berliners, or here in Poland, pączki, maybe not exactly the same, but very similar, at least visually. So that was probably the first speech of that caliber by a US president in Europe during one of these crises. Another one that is probably quite famous is when Ronald Reagan came in 1987, and again in Berlin stood there and sent a message to Gorbachev saying,
"Tear down this wall."
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And it did happen 2 years later.
Amazing, so, 2 years later, yes.
So definitely historical moments.
Adam, as ever, the clock in the corner of the room is ticking away furiously, and so I'm going to have to ask you to pause there, but we'll pick it up next time. There we are. As usual, the clock is telling me that we have to bring this particular programme to an end, but fear not, we'll pick it up next time on Poland Daily History, and we hope you'll join us. In the meantime, thank you for watching.